Okay, if we figure 2,500.
Never mind, because my mother would have told me.
22,000, more like 2,000?
That just didn't end of that.
40 by 52,000,
Whatever he
yeah.
says, he got 100 days, 85.
We're just trying to figure out square footage.
You've been in here 20 days, but.
No, he got 100 days,
40 by 50.
Well,
complete and covered.
Okay.
Yeah, but depending on when the doctors are taking,
They think he can.
they move over the
Okay.
certain amount of days, then they have to pay a copay. So it's already been,
Maybe 40 by 50.
to,
Yeah.
I don't know if they got the roof, it's a little more.
No, we're not, we just wanted,
because I
you know,
paid it out of his money every
basic
month.
square footage of
So
the
he can stay on, he'll pay.
two-dimensional.
Special inspector are in charge,
Ooh, that's a good one to call.
Yeah, they know.
Okay.
In terms of the total, I mean, the six,
6,000.
it's a little over 6,000 between the three buildings, I think. That's the number I've heard.
Okay, and he's saying 40 by 50 for each one of these, that's 2,000.
Well, he's already.
Yeah, it's
there.
kinda- I think both of these are about 2,000 and that one's bigger.
The
Yeah.
retail place, yeah, down there.
The insurance guy, they go around and they measure the outside of the buildings, basically.
Right.
It's on the,
All right,
it's
let's
on your left-hand side of the street.
open with a word of prayer.
A lot of people, when they do a lot like this, so they can give notice of the therapy every day. But if he comes going, they make arrangements to have, somebody come out to give him therapy twice a week.
Right.
But when he's there, it's every day. He's been having some good workouts. He's had some good workouts.
Well, good. Well, let's open with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this new day, and we thank you for the chance to meet together, to continue reading this letter, second letter of John. We pray, Lord, that you would give us wisdom, and you would give us truth and love. So hear our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, we're 2 verses into this very short book. Maybe we'll get a little further today. To the elder, to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not I alone, but also all those who know the truth. Because the truth, look how many times truth was repeated right there. Because the truth that resides in us and will be with us because of the truth that resides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ the Son of the Father in truth and love. Are you knowing a pattern? Actually, this week I did a video at the end of this week on, somebody sent me, because of these videos that I'm doing, someone sent me a video saying, what is truth? Can you define truth for us? So I did an hour kind of walking through some different ways of approaching this question. Now, given what you see in verses 1 through 3, what do you imagine truth to be?
Something very important.
Something very important.
Where it's something they're supposed to know.
Something they're supposed to know.
An honesty in the facts that are presented.
And honesty in the facts that are presented. So this week, I'm going to talk about him a little bit in my sermon. There's a guy named Sam Harris. Anybody recognize his name?
Well, it depends. If I was saying Harris, if it was me, I'd be talking about a singer, but for church, it'd be something.
All right. To my knowledge, he's not known for his singing. I'll say that. He's one of, in the 1990s, there was a group called the New Atheists.
You know what?
The New Atheists.
Oh.
And they weren't singers either. And they were Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens. Now, Christopher Hitchens passed away a few years ago, so there's just 3 of them. But they kind of came to prominence in the 90s as 4 people who were basically pretty aggressively anti-religious and specifically anti-Christian. And now they've all gone kind of soft on Christianity and are really hard on the Muslims. And Sam Harris is kind of indicative of that. So this week, this guy, this Canadian psychologist who I've been making my videos about, he's going to have 2 conversations with Sam Harris this week. And the conversation, when he's tried having conversations with Sam Harris before, they kept getting bogged down over the definition of truth. So if I were to ask you to define truth, just kind of as it is, what might you say?
Jesus as an example.
Okay. Now in a church, in a Christian group, when we think truth, very quickly anybody know where I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except by me? You know where that's found in the Bible? John. Gospel of John. What were you going to say, Maury? Same thing. And so in church, truth, we jump right away to Jesus or God, and notice that I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Now, that phrase, you would have to understand it within this entire context of what's called historically Second Temple Judaism. And this is the time of Jesus. But notice how truth very quickly, it's assumed to Jesus' audience that truth is very much connected to God the Father, them being Jews. And then Jesus basically inserts himself in there and says, and notice what he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those are 3 very big words. And way implies way to what? Way to something important, which would be the Father. Now, Jesus uses Father. The more generic word would be obviously be God. The Hebrews would have the Lord. But, they're all, again, Jesus says this within a context. All languages within a context. Porque yo puedo hablar español, pero ustedes no me entienden.
Sí.
All languages within a context. So, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. But how might Sam Harris talk about truth?
Only something you can know for sure.
So we have no for sure. Okay, so Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK. True or false?
No question. No, they argue about that.
They do argue about that, which is why I brought it up. Well, anybody have opinions on it?
Not that we were there. We
How
know
about-
what we saw on the TV that night.
Okay, how about this one? Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
True.
Why do you believe that one?
I saw.
You were watching TV that night, and here comes Jack Ruby. Bang! Down he goes.
Which I don't know whether it's planned or not, because most security police is not gonna let nobody get that close to their.
Yeah. So what was going on?
They're taken in custody, you're not gonna let nobody get that close to them.
And now often you'll see a high value person that's arrested, and they're bringing him out like to the jail or something. What do they got him in? Got him in body armor, a helmet. They don't want any Jack Ruby situation going on here, because when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald, what happened?
They just walked up and shot him.
We just walked up and shot him, but what did that do in terms of the first question I asked you?
It ended it.
It ended it. And so suddenly the question, now when we're talking truth this way, we're not quite talking God so much, are we?
No.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. And so,
Truth from a human standpoint.
okay, so someone like Sam Harris defines truth as that which, basically, truth, that which relates, which is pretty open, to reality. Right? I mean, Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. Not a lot of skepticism about that. There's not really that much skepticism about Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK.
It's a fact that can be verified.
Okay, a fact. And that becomes a very big word in these conversations. A fact.
Well. It's a fact that can be verified only if you trust the people that's investigating.
Ah! So there's a chain here.
Yes.
One person says one person says one person. And so what you try to do is you try to establish the veracity of the links in the chain. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So right there you have a chain implied, don't you? Very interesting. Now this fact thing works pretty well with certain kinds of things. Certain kinds of fairly simple things like how many cell phones are here looking at me right here? Two. That's pretty easy. 1, 2. Not hard. Now, if I'd say something like, how many electrons or how many computations are the little computers in those cell phones processing right now in order to take this video and transmit it through Facebook and so on and so forth?
A lot.
A lot. We don't have, it's not 2, it's, well, we don't know.
No.
So the fact thing works pretty good for some things, but if I were to say now, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
Then we
Question mark.
I don't know if we can ever know that.
Yeah, right. I mean,
We would even be thinking, was he the only one in the building?
yeah, we don't
When
know.
he did the shooting.
Yeah, we don't. Was someone helping him?
Right behind him, telling him what to do?
Was someone spotting for him? Or even when we say acted alone, you know, some of the few things we know about Lee Harvey Oswald, he spent some time in the Soviet Union. Okay. Well, what do you mean by acted? I mean, this gets into the case. Okay, here we'll have some fun. Why did Donald Trump fire James Comey?
They wouldn't warrant,
Because he wasn't loyal to him. He didn't take his loyalty pledge. Or what did he tell Lester Holt?
The Russia thing.
It was the Russia thing. Okay. Another reason Donald Trump gives is, well, the FBI had lost confidence in him. Okay. Well, which answer is correct?
All of them, as far as he's
Oh,
concerned.
yeah.
All of them.
Whatever
then
you
we-
want to believe.
Whoever you want to believe, but then you ask, well, was Donald Trump firing James Comey obstruction of justice?
By definition.
By definition.
Yes.
Well,
The truth will come out.
the truth, I mean, right away, you see that, the question, did Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald? That's pretty clear. I mean, we've got a lot of evidence for that. And almost nobody will deny that. Is Donald Trump's firing of James Comey obstruction of justice? Oh my.
Yeah.
That's Well, was it the Russia thing? Was it he had lost confidence in the FBI? Was it the Hillary Clinton thing before the election? Was it that he didn't give him his loyalty pledge? I mean, and you have that same problem with Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Well, what were the things that all contributed to his acting? Was it his mother didn't give him enough love?
That's it.
So we could say Lee Harvey Oswald mama was responsible for him shooting JFK. I mean, I'm sure somebody could make an argument. Or maybe, I don't know his family life, maybe his father beat him. Maybe his father abandoned him. Maybe he was bullied in the neighborhood. I mean, how far back do you want to go? Maybe his father was malnourished at a point in his life which set apart, because now they've got all these studies about, the Dutch who starved during the war. This impacted the obesity rates of their children. I mean, it's wild when you ask someone, why did you do this? Probably the best answer is, I don't know.
Probably just didn't like the name.
Probably just didn't like the man.
And just leave it up to, well, first of all, Trump could have just said, I fired him because I have a power of fire, and left it at that, because really, he's supposed to pick the people that he wants to work with and do the job. And then let us just make up everything else. Because we would have gave all those reasons anyway. He didn't have to give them.
So here's the thing. So Sam Harris says, truth is that which relates to reality. Well, what is relates and what is reality? And so you start drilling down on this word truth, and I spent an hour on that video. I'm not going to spend an hour on it here, drilling down all the way. But basically, when we talk about truth, why do we use the word uncover the truth? I mean, you find that word, we use that word all the time with respect to the truth. Well, why is the truth covered?
Very complex.
There's a lot of complexity on top of it.
A lot of layers.
A lot of layers on top of it.
A lot of parts we don't know about.
A lot of parts we don't know on top of it. And so, when we find truth here in the Gospel of John, or not in the Gospel of John, in the letter to John, when we think about the Gospel of John, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Well, let's think about this character that we call God. Why, in scheme after scheme, is God considered the final judge, the final authority?
God is above all.
Okay, he's above. Well, what do you mean by above? Why did you pick above?
It's a higher standard.
A higher standard. So you took above and switched it for higher, which means the same thing.
He's in charge.
He's in charge. Okay. Now,
According to our beliefs.
according to our beliefs, well, someone stands up and people are calling him a liar, and someone might stand up and say, God as my witness. Well, why did he pick on God to be his witness?
Nobody higher.
Nobody higher. But what else? I mean, okay, higher, so there's a hierarchy there.
God is the truth. God is the truth.
Okay.
Purer.
He's all-knowing. He knows everything.
Why is God the truth? What does God have that we don't have access to?
He was the creator.
Okay, so he's there at the beginning. What else does God have? So we're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald again. What does God have that we have problems with?
He's all-knowing and he's everywhere present.
He's all-knowing and he's everywhere. So he not only is Lee Harvey Oswald's parents and any factors that might have gotten involved, well, let's ask someone who works in this field. Can prenatal factors impact the actions of a person in this world? What do you think, Edie?
Yes.
Give us an example.
If the mother is super stressed during her pregnancy, it's going to be transferred to the fetus and will have an impact on the fetus.
How about stuff that happens, sometimes they call adoption, what do they call it? The first wound or something like that? Well, they studies on infants who are adopted. They don't even remember. But children who are adopted have a tendency to struggle with, sometimes they call it attachment. Pre-verbal trauma. They can't even articulate, but this is built into them. I mean, we have this stuff. Well, who on earth can figure out Lee Harvey Oswald? What kind of information would you need to have to answer the question, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
We don't have any information on that.
We can't do that math. We can't run those experiments. Well, this is why we pick on God. And why God is at the end of this. Now, here's the question for you. Let's say you're Sam Harris and you say, there is no God. What are you left with?
Not knowing.
Not knowing. Not only not knowing, but, okay, let's say Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK. Let's assume that. Answer this question. Was there any justice done to Lee Harvey Oswald?
Did he get shot?
Well, he got shot. Is that justice?
Well, at that time it was.
But it's hard to say for us, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, let me ask you this question. Joseph Stalin. There's some conspiracy theories about Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin killed a lot of people. Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao killed a lot of people. Were they ever called to account for the things that they did?
Not in this life.
If you got no God, you're going to struggle with truth.
So there's no justice.
You're going to struggle with justice. You're going to struggle with a lot. You take God out of the picture, well, what does that kind of tend to leave us with in this life?
A lot of questions.
A lot of questions.
Pick your own God.
Pick your own God. What do you mean by that?
Pick your own truth.
Your own moral authority. Your
That's
own
right.
Final judge.
Final judge. If I can get away with it, if I can be Joseph Stalin or Chairman Mao and have everyone in terror under me so that they don't challenge me, who's going to call me to account? You see, God, the relationship with truth, the only imaginary, okay, let's give Sam Harris his due, the only imaginary being, let's call him imaginary, because what kind of being would be sufficient to be able to answer the question about Lee Harvey Oswald? Well, he'd have to know everything. He'd have to have all power. He'd have to be incorruptible. I mean, Chairman Mao couldn't, come up to the throne and say, hey, let me cut you a deal. No deal making with this guy.
Well, but if.
Oh, Barbara's going to deal with him.
I know. What if he accepted Christ before he died?
Oh, okay.
Even after killing all those
We'll have to talk about that. But for the sake of this experiment, the point I'm trying to make is God, whether or not you believe he exists, functions in a fundamental way to all of the concepts that we assume govern our behavior. you take God out of the picture, things start to move.
No, they fall apart.
Yes, they fall. And so then people have said, so I mentioned Christopher Hitchens. He's got a brother named Peter. Christopher and Peter grew up together. They grew up in the Anglican church. When they got to be teenagers, they threw the whole thing away. They didn't believe in any of it, and they went and lived wild lives, and they, got enamored with communism. That was kind of the answer to all the injustices of capitalism. And, well, Christopher kept moving as an atheist and became an atheist apologist. Peter had a different track. Peter reconverts to Christianity. Because why does he do this? Well, he spends years as a journalist where? In the Soviet Union. Begins looking around and starts to say, this isn't a good way to live. This system doesn't work. And so he actually writes this book called Rage Against God, where he pretty much takes on the arguments of his brother and says, if you take God out, things start to move in ways. Now, that things move in ways that we don't understand, that shouldn't be a surprise to us, because we can't even answer the question Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. How much time and attention and resources have been devoted to this question by the United States government? And after the United States government, by Oliver Stone, and by, did Lee Harvey Oswald act alone? This shouldn't be so hard to figure out, but we can't even come to an agreement on what does acted mean. Our only hope is that there's actually a being who is good, who knows, who was there, and because you take him out of the equation. So, grace, mercy, and peace be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and love. Okay. Now we talked about truth and love quite a bit. So we've got truth in with this God right here. Why does John see necessary to put love in there too?
God is love. God loves us.
Why is that important in this conversation? So let's imagine there's a being that started this all, that sees everything, that's all powerful. See, basically, you can get this God from Plato. You can get this God from Aristotle, the unmoved mover. What is the peace that Jerusalem adds to Athens, which is absolutely critical?
Love, it's a relationship.
That's right. So you can get from Plato, God is truth. The Greeks could get there. And Paul essentially in Romans 1 says, you can get there. In Acts 17, Paul says, you can get to God is truth. But what if this God is only truth? Where are we then? We're kind of out in the cold. So, if you really want a better God, he needs to not just be truth, he needs to also be love. And if you have truth and love, well, suddenly we have, how does verse 3 start? Grace, mercy, peace. Now, if we just read verse 3, grace, mercy, peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and love. Now, I'm telling you, you'd be hard-pressed to fit this much really important stuff in one little place. Now, this 2 John here that we're studying is a what? Is it a book? Is it a,
A letter.
it's a letter. Okay, it's a letter. How do we know it's a letter?
The introduction says.
That's what the introduction says. It's the form of a letter. See, when we get to 1 John, we're going to have the problem because we're not sure if it's a letter or not. We're not sure what the document is. Because, well, what's a letter? Or we sometimes, in Greek, we call it an epistle. What is one of these things? How does that work? What is it?
From someone to someone else.
Okay, so you've got from someone to someone else.
Form of communication.
It's a form of communication. And we know it's a form of communication because we mentioned from A to B. So, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth. You know, when we read that the first time, you probably just kind of passed over the whole love and truth business, didn't you? You didn't even read it because it wasn't interesting to you. Now it's interesting to you because love and truth, oh my goodness. Now we know it's a letter. Grace, mercy, and peace. Wow. Grace. It's a big word. Mercy. Okay, well, let's parse them out a little bit. Now, we're going to have a little bit of difficulty because words are like Velcro and things stick to them, which is really important because if things didn't stick to them, they wouldn't have any use. But it's also a downside because other things stick to them, and so sometimes there's so much sticking to a word, we can't see the word underneath. And we're going to have a lot of that trouble, especially with grace, because we're Protestants, and we've been sticking a lot to this word. Now, in Greek, and this is a different thing, it's charis. Now, this had a definition in the 1st century. We assume the book was from the late 1st century, probably, or the letter. It has a definition after Luther, all of us Protestants. So then we have to try and figure, well, what is he actually saying? And what accumulations on the word are okay for us to bring in here? All right. So now that I've just complicated the matter for you, tell me what this word means.
Unmerited favor.
Unmerited favor. Mari was faithfully taught the catechism as a young woman.
God's riches at Christ's expense.
God's riches at Christ's expense. And that's all good. And now we're saying that as Protestants. And what's helpful is say, okay, that's the whole word with all of this stuff around it. Charis in the Greek, even before Christianity, before Jesus was born, charis was sort of a favorable disposition. Okay? It would be, let's imagine the master of the house, which is usually a man, and let's imagine a little slave child. And the little slave child is cute. So Benny, my son Benny, is teaching swimming at the pools. And he comes home the other night and says, I love teaching 7-year-olds. Well, why, Ben? Because the 3-year-olds, well, they can't do a whole lot yet. And the 12-year-olds, well, they got attitude and stuff.
They know everything.
But the 7-year-olds, they're just at the point now where they can really start to get swimming. And so they start to do it, and they're excited. And then he mentions one little 7-year-old, and he says, oh, and she is so cute. Well, Benny has charis towards this little girl. Well, what does that mean? And how's that going to play out?
Special feelings.
Special feeling.
Favor.
Favor, exactly. She'll be his favorite for the week or so that she's in swim lessons. And now that's going to develop into something that we have a lot of issues with now, bias. Now, parents always deal with this because parents, what do parents say? I love all my kids the same, right? And every parent knows, well, this is what I have to say, and this is what I have to do, but there's always
one differently.
everyone differently. There's always biases in there.
Well, and each kid is different, so they need to be loved differently.
Well, that's right. So it's not a bad thing. But chorus is kind of close to bias in that, well, yeah, I love all my kids, but right now, this one's bringing me a lot of joy. This one over here might be bringing me a lot of grief. And sometimes they'll switch. This one that brought me a lot of grief now brings me joy, and this one that brought me a lot of joy now brings me grief. And probably part of the reason for the grief is the joy that was before it. Relationships are like that. Charis is this favorable disposition. It's this bias. It's this joy. Now, okay, grace, mercy, peace will be with us from God. Okay, let's just use the grace. What does it say? Grace will be with us from God. What is that saying?
The gift from him.
That's right.
It emanates.
That's right. Favor. We're the apple of his eye. Now, obviously, you can pour some more theology into it later. God's riches at Christ's expense. But, okay, how about, so that's grace. Well, how about mercy? Mercy is quite a bit less, at this point, less encumbered by a lot of things. What is mercy?
Compassion.
What's that?
Is it compassion? Does he have mercy?
There's a sense of compassion with it. Who needs mercy?
Somebody in need.
Someone in need.
Somebody who fails.
Someone who fails. If you fall down before a judge and ask for mercy, what is implicit in that request? What are you also saying?
I
You're
deserve
getting
it.
wrong.
I'm guilty. I need mercy. So the first word is like this unearned favor. You know, that little girl that Benny likes in the swimming pool. That's unearned favor. Little girl didn't do anything to earn it. He just looks at her and he has a bias towards her. It says, when I go to sweet swim lessons, I hope so-and-so is there because she's fun to watch. And that's all there is to it, you know. There's nothing bad about it. Mercy is a different word. Mercy is what guilty people plead for, but implicit in there is their admittance of guilt. They plead guilty and they ask for mercy. Now, it's interesting that we put these two words together, isn't it? And when you put them together, what kind of picture does that look like?
You need grace to receive mercy.
Yes.
Or you need grace to give mercy.
Yes. You see very quickly these two words. Boy, these are big, rich, powerful words and complicated. And about the only way we can adequately talk about them is by imagining pictures of people and how they're acting.
And you can't really separate them. They're so intertwined.
Yeah. But in this one, you might imagine the little girl who's innocent. But we add this word and what? She's not innocent anymore.
Plus it gives a little bit more power.
Yeah, it does give more power, doesn't it? And it gives more power to actually the judge. Because the judge who sees someone and just kind of smiles. Well, that's, so we talked about Daniel. And Daniel had some charm to him, and there was a certain amount of charis I had towards Daniel. But there are times when I needed mercy towards Daniel. So, and we're not even done. I mean, this is just a salutation. This is something we don't even read. But these words are so big and so powerful, they are setting up the whole letter and the entire relationship. So, grace, mercy, and peace. Oh boy, oh boy.
Well, if you have grace and you have mercy, you got to have a lot of peace.
Okay, well let's take this word apart a little bit. What does peace mean?
Quiet.
Okay, so, well,
Satisfaction between two parties.
Contentment.
Two parties involved.
two parties. Yeah, that's important. Contentment. What is implied by peace? What came before peace? Conflict. So, grace, mercy, peace. There's an entire story built into these three words, isn't there? There's an entire image that comes to our minds by these three words. Grace, mercy, peace. And now we should remember John is a Jew who grew up with Hebrew and grew up with the Old Testament. We have shalom. You know, after every service, I offer you God's peace. Well, shalom, that's well-being. So it's, right away, just these three words. Grace, mercy, peace will be with us. Okay. Why is us important there?
He's talking to the church, to believers.
Remember, this is a letter. Two parties. Will be with us.
Including himself.
All those involved.
Yeah. The one who's writing, the one he's writing to. Well, where is this coming from? Well, he says, doesn't he?
From God.
From God.
The Father.
The Father.
And from Jesus Christ, according to my version here.
Yes. And from Jesus Christ. But it's just not leaving it out there.
The Father's Son.
Now here's something to think about. One of the key things that Jesus brings to the entire conversation, if you knew nothing about the author of this book, I could say to you, this man either knew Jesus or was deeply influenced by him. Now you could say, well, he was a Jew, and that gets into this grace, mercy, peace business. But I would say he's not just a Jew, he's a follower of Jesus. And the reason I would say that is this word Father. Because here is something that marks out Jesus from the crowd. Because if you look at, we've been talking about Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Well, let's do Donald Trump obstructed justice when he fired James Comey. Now, let's say that some prosecutor brings this charge, and because he's president, it's got to go before Congress. Well, what you look for is you say, well, he said it was the Russia thing. He said he could do it. It was his right as president. He said it's because he talked about Hillary Clinton during the election. He said the FBI just wasn't working right. He says all of these things, okay? Well, a judge is going to listen for something in particular. Now, it might be the Russia thing, because obstruction of justice would say the president is trying to cover up somewhere where he broke the law. All right? Now, when it comes to John and Jesus here, I could say, okay, John is a Jew He knows the Old Testament. He speaks Hebrew. He's from the Galilee. But when he says Father, how do I know he's been with Jesus?
Old Testament Jews didn't call God Father.
None of these people called God Father. It's implicit in certain Old Testament passages. But when you read, especially the Gospel of John, when we get there, I mentioned in a sermon, I mentioned Sam Harris, I mentioned Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman likes to say, when he reads Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he likes to say, well, Jesus wasn't really God. That's what Bart Ehrman likes to say. But even Bart Ehrman, when he reads the Gospel of John, Bart Ehrman has to concede the author of the Gospel of John believed Jesus was the Son of God. Why? It's dripping throughout the Gospel of John. Again and again. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is a man who came down to earth from God. Logos, the Word became flesh and dwelt with us and then went back to heaven. It is crystal clear in the Gospel of John over and over and over again. But now, when we say the word Father, in what ways, let's say the Lord and then Jesus, in what ways does Father relate to this relationship? And in what ways doesn't it?
One and only heavenly.
Okay, so they come from heaven. Well, there's a strong tie. How? So if I say...
Was Yahweh used for other people?
No, that was a personal name.
But I mean, in those days, they didn't call somebody else Yahweh. No. Okay.
So I am the father of Ben. How are these two relationships different?
You're not Lord of all.
I'm not Lord of all.
It's,
How did Ben come into being?
that's what I was gonna say.
Through my wife. Me and my wife make Ben. And you can't get to Ben without the wife. Well, that's not in this picture. Okay? The Mormons put it in a lot later, but doesn't really belong. Alright? There's no God the Mother. Alright? Well, then we get into Mary, but we'll leave her alone for now. So why does Jesus use Father in relationship to his relationship? And John puts it right here in the salutation. So what are we talking about?
He has the attributes of God.
Okay. Ben has the attributes of Paul. Jesus has the attributes of God. What else? But he's got only some of the attributes, right? You get into Christology. He's got a divine nature and a human nature. We can get into a lot of Christology there. But what is Jesus forefronting in terms, or what is John forefronting here? Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and love.
It's an intimate relationship.
But it says forever.
Yours says forever?
Yeah. Verse
In verse 3?
1, no.
No, in verse 3.
Yeah, okay. No, it doesn't say.
I was going to say, boy, that NIV 1984 was taking liberties.
Sorry, Paul. The Father's Son. Sent by the Father.
Yeah. Well, what does Jesus say? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the
Father.
Father
But through me.
but through me. See, here's the thing. Gosh, our current political situation is just so handy in terms of illustrations. So you got Donald Trump, right? Let's say you're a Chinese business person, and you want to get to the Father. How do you get to him?
Stay in his hotel.
One way is to get to Donald Trump Jr. Now let's talk. Oh, let's not have them be Chinese. Let's have them be Russians. And you have dirt on Hillary Clinton. And so I'm not making this up. I mean, because this is. So you have the Russian woman who's the lawyer, and she says, we have dirt on Hillary Clinton, and this comes out, and the first thing Donald Trump Jr. says, no, that didn't happen. I met with her to talk about adoption, but then a transcript of the meeting came out, and oh yeah, I guess we did talk about that too. Oh, okay. But, I mean, the ancient world, this was how things worked in the ancient world, okay? If you want Caesar, well, we're going to have in the sermon today. If you have Ahab, you have the house of Ahab, okay? Who's going to be the next king?
The son.
A son, okay. Now, what you want is for your line to continue. So, what do you have to do? Here's the problem. People die. People die a lot. And in the ancient world, they die a lot of things. You can get scraped with some rusty nail, and boom, you're going to die of tetanus. You can eat something wrong. Lots of things will die. So you're a king, and you want a son. Well, how do you improve the odds?
Kill all the competition.
Well, first of all, you kill all your brothers. But now you want a son. Well, what do? It's not that hard. You try to have lots of them, right? Let's say you have one woman. Well, how many kids a year can she produce?
One.
About one. Well,
Get more wives.
Get more wine.
now we're talking. Get more wives. And what do you do with all these wives?
Hopefully
Yeah,
have a son.
You gotta keep getting them pregnant. You just gotta line them up and, all right, we're working on you this month. And so you just keep, wear the poor king out. But hey, there's a dynasty to make. So you get, so Ahab, when we get to the rebellion of Jehu, now there are 70 sons of Ahab. Now let's again remember Hebrews and Numbers. Might there have been, if we'd sit down and count them all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Might there have been 70? Sure. But the number looks suspicious. Why?
Even
7.
It's 7.
It's 7 times 10. Which would then, we know the way the Hebrews talked, and part of that was like saying, yeah, lots. So could there have been 70? Sure. But the point of the number was probably Ahab was successful. And so lots of wives, lots of sons. Well, is this unusual in terms of Israelite kings? David. How did that go with David and all those sons and wives?
Not well.
Not good. How did it go with Solomon and all those sons and wives?
Not good.
Even worse. Well, so Jehu comes. What does Jehu have to do in order to bring the punishment of God against the line of Ahab? Guess what?
Wipe out the sons.
All gone. Kill them all. So, well, where were we? What does it mean to be a son?
Father, son.
Father, son. No one comes to the Father except through me, Jesus says. Everybody understood that. But now, again, grace, mercy, peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and love. You just thought that was a throwaway salutation. There's a reason those words are in the salutation. Our salutations for letters are much, much shorter now and much less ambitious. When you write a letter, how do you usually start it?
Dear sir.
Dear so-and-so.
Dear. Why do you write dear?
It's a pleasant beginning.
Okay, what does it imply?
They need to.
Cordial relationship.
Cordial relation. They mean something to you. We have a bond between us. Now, if you don't want to imply that bond, like you're writing your letter to AT&T, what salutation do you have?
To whom it may concern.
Or emails anymore. It's, hello.
Yeah, email. You don't even have a salutation. Hey, get your dog to stop crapping on my lawn. The neighbor. But here it is. And you didn't think, well, so what with the salutation? So what with is it a letter? All of this stuff matters. And the words that they use tell us a tremendous amount about what's in their minds and what's in their world. And if we know other things about their world, we can try to piece this together. And this is a lot further away than did Lee Harvey Oswald act alone? So maybe next week we'll get to verse 4. Actually, once we get to a certain point in the letter, when we're done with all these huge concepts, whoosh, well then it goes fast. Because we know what the terms are, and we know what the conversation is, but then we're going to have other things to deal with, because on one hand, all of this love, and don't even greet him when you see him in the marketplace. Whoa, something happened. All right, let's pray. Lord, we are Americans and we get to the point. We don't flower things up with salutations. And perhaps, Lord, that's not a good thing. But Lord, we do count on your grace, mercy, and peace for our lives. So we ask, Lord, that you would be with us as we continue to work through this letter, as we continue to walk through this day, as we walk through this week. May the things that we've learned in this class shape who we are, how we position ourselves with respect to you, and how we position ourselves with respect to our neighbors. So hear our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.